Elizabeth Ehrlich Roth remembers her mother singing to her as a child. At the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Elizabeth saw her mother, father, and 3 brothers for the last time. She credits her survival to her cousin and her sister, all 3 of whom survived Auschwitz-Birkenau, Stutthof, Bromberg-Ost concentration camps, as well as the death march. Elizabeth credits her survival to her cousin, to her sister, and also luck. She was born in Czechoslovakia in 1926, but after World War I, Germany annexed territory it had lost, the Sudetenland, and Hungary, an ally of Germany, also annexed territory it lost after World War I, including Elizabeth's hometown. Elizabeth was Czechoslovakian when she turned 12 years old in March 1938, and by November she was Hungarian. In Hungary, Nicholas Horthy, a self-described anti-Semite, ruled from 1920 to 1944. Under his autocratic right-wing government, they provoked a wave of violence towards the Jewish people all over Hungary. His paramilitary units lynched, tortured, and murdered hundreds of Jewish people all over Hungary. And by 1920, Hungary passed its first anti-Semitic law. This was 13 years before the Nazis came to power in 1933, and this law effectively ended the legal equality of Jewish people in Hungary. Between 1938 and 1944, Hungary passed 22 anti-Semitic laws. These laws made the theft of Jewish property, their segregation, and the denial of their human rights legal. By the spring of 1944, it was clear that Germany was losing the war. Italy had surrendered. The Soviets were making major gains along the Eastern Front, and still they invaded Hungary. Under the guidance of the SS, Hungarian officials moved 440,000 Jewish people to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the overwhelming majority of them were murdered upon arrival in the gas chambers between May 15th and July 9th. In Hungary, out of 800,000 Jewish people that lived there at the time, 565,000 of them were murdered. This is the history that Elizabeth lived through. I met Elizabeth on January 14th, and she is a ball of fire. I am in awe of her resiliency. She describes herself as lucky when talking about her experiences of the Holocaust, in the concentration camps, facing Dr. Mengele and the gas chambers twice. She's a ball of fire. I am in awe of her. But she has been keeping her past to herself all of these years. It's impossible to fathom the truth of the Holocaust. How could a country in the 20th century create a national policy intended to kill all of the Jewish people of Europe? I am an actor, trained to recreate the personae of other people, but I cannot possibly recreate the torture, the starvation, and the murder that Elizabeth endured and witnessed during her time in the Holocaust. Hopefully, by sharing her story, we together can help Elizabeth carry the weight of her past that she has so bravely been carrying by herself all of these years. This is Elizabeth Ehrlich Roth's experience of the Holocaust, told in her own words. My name is Elizabeth Ehrlich Roth, and I was born March 26, 1926, Munkac, Czechoslovakia. Well, the city when I was born was Czechoslovakian, but in 1938 it became Hungarian. Oh, there were many villages surrounding Munkach and many forests in the area, so lumber was one of the main businesses. We had numerous lumber yards. And I remember my father, Leopold. He was a very religious man. He had a big family. He had 3 sisters and 4 brothers. Now, most of them lived near us, but 2 of his sisters moved to South America, or to America when they were 16 years old. Now, the rest of them, they lived in the area, and we had many cousins from both my father's side and from my mother's side. Now, I do not remember my paternal grandfather, but I do remember my grandmother, Baba Cheva. She died at home in 1938. But when I think of my father, I think of a hard-working man who always went to the synagogue and tried to teach his 3 sons the 5 books of Moses. His main concern was that they learned Hebrew, but he did not care about their efforts in other schooling as much. He worked at a candle factory. He was foreman of the factory for a rich Jewish family, and he made the candles. Now, he started there when he was 17. He married from there, and between 40 and 42 years old, he was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, we were not rich, for there were poorer people than we, because father had a pretty nice job. We had non-Jewish neighbors, and we would go into their houses at the Christmas time, and we would look at their Christmas trees, and we played with non-Jewish children. I mean, there were Jewish neighborhoods, but the factories, they were a little out of the way, so all sorts of people lived there, and mostly rich people, because they owned the factories. But the people who worked at the factories, they were mixed, non-Jews and Jews, and they lived on the premises where the factories were. And I remember my mother, Faida. She was a homemaker, always baking and cooking noodles. She would always be busy on Wednesdays preparing for the Shabbos. She cooked and she baked, and she would go into the market with all of the other women in the town, and she would buy a chicken. And she would take the chicken to the shohet, who would pluck the chicken, open the chicken, and make it kosher. That's how I remember my mother. We had to help her. We always went with her. Now, my mother's Jewish name was Faida, but her maiden name was Weiss. I do not know what her date of birth was, but she was about 14 years old when she was sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, my mother, she was a tall woman, and she came from a small village, Belebova. It was not too far from Munkach, about 10 miles. And in the village, she got married to my father. And their marriage was a big deal because my father, he already had his job as a candle maker, and my mother had a dowry. So after the marriage, my father, he tried his hand at some business, but he lost the dowry, and that's why he remained a candle maker for the rest of his life. Now, my mother, she came from a big family. She had 5 brothers. She was the only girl. Now, 2 of her brothers moved to South America, and one of them lived in Budapest, and another one, a tailor, lived in Munkach by us. And oh, it was so beautiful. We would always get together with the brother in Budapest, and we would go vacation with the brother in the village, and it was beautiful country. My mother, her family had some land, and an uncle had bought them out. And so when my mother's brothers, they left the village, but my mother, she decided to stay with my grandmother. And the uncle who had bought them out, he had bought the house as well as the land, so now they had some money. And my mother and my grandmother moved to the city. I never got to meet my maternal grandmother, but I was named after her. My brother Shlomo, he was born in 1924. My brother Fishel was born in 1932, and Yor was born in 1933. Shlomo, he was named after my father's father. Here we would call him Solomon. He was about a year and a half older than I, and we had some fun times together. But my two younger brothers, they were only little. They were about 11 and 12 years old in 1944. And we used to hear my mom telling us stories about her hometown and singing us lullabies in Hungarian. On the Shabbos, we would wait for the candle to go out, and we would all sit around the stove, and she would tell us the stories of her hometown. And then on Fridays and Saturdays, sometimes we would go to the movies, and we were not supposed to do that. And my brother, Shlomo, he had a friend in a Zionist organization, and Shlomo, he was forbidden to speak to a Zionist because religious people, we were not allowed to go to Zionist organizations. Well, my mother knew he went, and she covered for him. Oh, I remember we always used to play outside. We would play outside and then go into the city, and during the summers, one time we went to the lake without our parents, just as children. Oh, the holidays. The holidays were beautiful. We ate differently throughout the entire week. We even looked forward to the Shabbos score. We had eaten chicken all week, and only on the Shabbos were you allowed to eat meat. On the Shabbos, we got new clothes, and we could show them off to our neighbors when we got dressed. Oh, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, my mother, she would go to the synagogue with the rest of us. Now, my mother, she did not go to the synagogue every Shabbos. She would light a candle at home. But the most important was that she said a prayer, she took care of the family, and she lit a candle on the Shabbos. Now, I went to a Czech school until 1938. But under the Hungarians, when they took over, we were not allowed to go to Czech schools anymore. It was either Hungarian schools or German schools. So I went to a Hungarian school for about 2 years. School was not pleasant anymore after this. I liked school, but the Jewish children, we had to sit separately from the rest of the children. The other children, they would call us names, like dirty Jew. This did not happen in the Czech schools. In the Czech schools, the teachers were not anti-Semitic, and in the Czech schools, a rabbi would come for an hour a week and he would teach the children their Hebrew lessons. And the Catholic children, they had their religious hour as well. This was all put to a stop by the Hungarians in 1938. And then eventually, I could not go to school. The children, they had found out about bloodline. There was anti-Semitism in the neighborhoods, and they would call it matzah time. And then, during the Holocaust, people would turn in Jewish people to the authorities for the price of a few coins or a handful of sugar. And then there was the midwife. She would come to our house every Christmas, and she would bring us cake and candy, and then during the Holocaust, she would find out that somebody was hiding in the forest, and she would turn them into the authorities. I learned a trade in the millinery shop. In the millinery shop, the owner, she would hire 2 girls for 3 years, and we earned no money. But after the 3 years, we earned a little money. Now, in the millinery shop, we had to clean the shop, we had to gather firewood, make the fire, sweep the sidewalk if it snowed. I always there, and we had fun. Our parents thought maybe we had a little bit too much fun. But in Europe at the time, people did not throw things away the way that they do here. You see, if you had a new hat, you would bring it to the millinery shop. And at the millinery shop, we would clean it with alcohol, redo it, put a new feather in it, for example. And then, when the hat was finished and the shop was closed, I would take the hat and I would deliver it to the woman's home, and she would tip me maybe 10 pennies. Now, in the millinery shop, the owner, she would take on the two girls for 3 years, and after they had learned everything, she would take on another new girl. But the girls who had finished learning, they were often fired because she figured, why should I pay someone who was finished? There were no unions back then. If a girl found another job, good for her, but if not, too bad. I finished the course at the millinery shop, and she paid me. I was so happy, it felt like I had graduated. But then the problems began. When the Jewish children couldn't go to school, and Jewish people could no longer own businesses, they closed her shop. It was over. I was 12 years old when the Hungarians came in 1938, so I knew what was happening. We knew that the government was going to have to change. The Czechs tried to mobilize to fight the Hungarians, but within a week, they took over the Subcarpathian route. Planning began immediately to address the Jewish question. We had heard that the Nazis had taken Slovakia and about what was going on in Poland. We read it in the newspapers. But the rich people, they heard the news because they had radios. And still, they would say that the Nazis would not come into our town. My father, he was so religious. He believed that everything that was happening to us was meant to happen. We did not know what was going on. It began to get worse. When my father, he could no longer work at the candle factory because Jewish people could no longer own businesses. So in order to provide kosher meat for our family and just a little bit of extra money, my father, he would buy a calf or a lamb and the showhead would come. And there was a basement on the factory grounds. They would take the calf or the lamb and they would slaughter it. And we would try to sell the meat on the black market. Now this was very dangerous because if they had caught us, they would punish us, beating us and sending us to jail. Now, my father, he was able to stay out of the army, but he was forced to join the Hungarian labor regiment. In Hungary, a law was passed that Jewish men from the ages of 20 to 48 years old had to join the Hungarian forced labor regiments, and they would call this Montezol law. Now, my father, he tried to make it fit in with his religious practices. He would probably pray as often as he could, but he would be gone for an entire year, and then he would come back for a week, and then he would go again. They wore a sort of military outfit, a matching hat and shirt, and they were all men of a certain age. Now, my father, he prayed as often as he could, and he would tell us his experiences in the labor camps about how hard he worked. But as we found out, the labor camps were not as bad as the concentration camps. It began to get worse when they forced us into the ghetto. We were not allowed to work in the ghetto. My parents thought that the Hungarians were going to supply us with food and clothes, shelter and work. They did not. We were forced into the ghetto. 1944. And on April 18th, immediately following Passover, the Judenrat publicized the Hungarian flyer in the streets of Munich about the forced relocation of the Jewish population into the ghetto. Now, we were told that we had to leave by City Hall. There was a designated area of town for the Jewish people. We were not allowed to bring many things with us into the ghetto, but we were allowed to bring few things. 2 articles of clothing, food, a folding bed, and a further load of up to 50 kilograms. Now, everybody from my family, all 7 people, we were so lucky because my father's sister, she lived on the street within the ghetto. And now she lived with a lot of relatives because my father's sister-in-laws lived with their in-laws. And so it was busy there. But she had 2 rooms, a storage space, as well as an attic. And we lived and slept in the attic. We were about 4 or 5 families with children in 2.5 rooms. I don't know what happened to our home or to our belongings. We were not allowed to leave the ghetto. We were allowed to buy small amounts of bread in the ghetto, but still, we had very little to eat, very little to do. My aunt's husband had very rich relatives, and they would bring us quite a bit of food at some time. But still, we had so little food, and we had so little space because it was overcrowded. We didn't know why this was happening. We were being told, this is happening because you are Jewish. My father believed that God was going to help us. But from the villages around Munich, the Hungarians were bringing Jewish people to the brickyards where the railroad tracks were. Therefore, they could easily load them up and take them to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I did not know about Auschwitz-Birkenau before I was deported here. But we heard rumors that the Nazis were killing Jews, and we believed these rumors because they had taken the Jews of Slovakia and Poland. Hungary was the last country they took. We stayed in the ghetto for a number of weeks until they began deportations after May 15th. And then we were marched to the brickyards. It was so frightening. We were surrounded by soldiers and dogs, and it was quite a walk, a 5-kilometer walk. And on this walk, children, old people, sick people, they were all chased along with us. And we were beaten mercilessly, urged to go faster. These people, they could not even survive this 5-kilometer walk. When we arrived at the brickyards, it was awful. Men asked us to undress so that they could check us for any possessions that we had hidden. The days spent at the brick factory, they were frightening. People were abused, beaten, had their beards torn off. We stayed there for a number of weeks because there were so many of us and only so many trains. Now, we stayed in big brickyards with big brick factories where they used to dry and store the bricks, and the conditions were terrible. The Hungarian gendarmes with their feathered hats. They were like Nazi police. They guarded the brickyards, and they were volunteers. But there was not much to say. None of us knew what was going on. We knew a few brave young people who tried to run away, but not many. I knew Helga Castle, who ran away. She tried to board a train, but she was caught and shot. And after we learned that, we were not inclined to run away anymore. No matter how bad the conditions were, we wanted to live. 3 transports left the brickyard on the 21st, 23rd, and 24th of May. And when our time came, they loaded us up into cattle cars. We were packed in there like sardines. We had no idea at the time where we were going. We were told we were going to be sent to Hungary. We thought maybe the Hungarian Nazis were going to give us work and shelter. But it was unclear. My 2 younger brothers, oh, they were so excited to ride on the train. They had never been on a train before in their life. They did not realize this was going to be their first and their last train ride. I was 17 at this time, and the hunger continued unabated. It's hard to describe what it was like on the cattle car. There were 70 to 80 people enclosed in each car, packed in like herrings. We had no food or water. I saw dead people, mostly the old people, but also babies. They were lying on straw on the ground. We had a bucket in the corner for the bathroom. It was a lot of stopping, standing around on the cattle cars. We spent the whole night in Krakow once. Somebody was able to see through the little wire windows. We thought, maybe we are still going to work on farms or in factories. But it was unclear. In fact, we were not going to work on a farm. Auschwitz-Birkenau was not far from Krakow. And the next morning, we arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration and death camp. When the train doors opened, we saw men in blue and white striped uniforms, and they told us to leave whatever belongings we had brought with us on the train. They said they would bring it to us later. They chased us out, yelling, "Los, los, fast, fast!" And then I remember seeing chimneys, and I thought to myself, oh, good, they are big kitchens here. And then we saw men who were telling young women who had children to give their babies to their mother, to an aunt, to an elder person. We did not understand why at this time, but later on we realized. These men knew that the SS would kill a young woman just because she had a baby. So my cousin was walking with us, and she was holding her boy baby of 9 months. And a man said to her in Yiddish, "Give the baby to your mother." My mother is not here. So the man walking with us, he kept asking, "Do you have any aunts with you?" He kept saying, "Give the baby to your aunt." And so my cousin, she handed her baby over to our aunt. She thought that she was going to see her baby again. And then we marched to the SS for selection, and I believe Mengele was there because I saw him later on in the camps. And there they separated us from the left and the right, and on one side, my sister, my cousin, they were taken to a different place. It was a lot of standing around in Auschwitz, in the lines. The SS was looking for twins, as I learned later from Mengele's experiments. And after they counted us, they took us to a washroom where the Jewish and the Polish men in the stripes, they told us to undress. And then they shaved our heads and everywhere else. And we stayed like that for a long time, naked, with our heads shaved. We could not even recognize each other. They gave us a dress to wear, gray, not striped, and no underwear. And after they had shaved our heads, they would take a brush or a rag and they would dip it in a bucket of orange or red paint, and they would paint the cross on our dress so that we would be easy to identify. And then they would take that brush or the rag and they would dip it in another bucket after they shaved our heads, and they would rub our heads with disinfectant because maybe we had lice. We had been in the ghetto on the trains for so long. They gave me a number on my dress, 38176. They did not tattoo us. We stayed in Sea Locker. Oh, and now there were about 30,000 people who lived in Sea Locker. There were 30 barracks or blocks with about 1,000 people in each block, and they put 12 to 15 women in one bunk. We had nothing to do. We didn't work. We would be chased out in the morning and at night to be counted, and then we would stand there for hours. The Germans, they picked out women from among the deportees to be the capos or the block tester, and these were the people who were in charge of the functioning of the block. Now, these women were mostly Hungarian or Polish. There were a few Romanian and Slovaks, but all of them were very mean. When we complained to them about what we were going through, they would say, none of these barracks had been here when they had got there, therefore they had built the barracks. They thought that we had it so easy. And then after we'd been there for a day, my sister, my cousin, and I, we walked up to the women who were already there and we asked them, where are all the barracks? And they pointed up to the chimney. And 2 or 3 days later, we understood what they meant. And then my cousin, she asked, where are all the children? And the women who had been there already were impervious. The block tester of our block, she pointed up at the chimney. And she said, you see that chimney right there? That is where your baby is. My cousin did not survive Auschwitz-Birkenau. She was depressed, mourning her murdered baby boy. We were so worried. We were so worried, and we were always thinking about food because we were young and growing. We were always hungry. We didn't do anything there but be chased out for Zalabel. We waked up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning to be counted, and we would stand there for hours. And sometimes they would bring us a little bowl of coffee to share among 5 people. But this coffee, oh, it did not taste or look like coffee. It had the taste and the consistency of mud. But each of us drank a little bit from the same bowl. They gave us a piece of bread once a day to share among 5 people, and this bread looked like a brick. They gave us soup as well. The soup, it had stones and when they counted us for Zolotell, they made the selections where they would take out the girls who were extremely malnourished and weak. One time, they selected me out. Ordinarily, we would stand in the line. Morella and myself, we would pinch each other's cheeks so we would not look so pale. But you see, she was in better condition than I was. She was older than I, 2 years older and stronger. And on the day that they had selected me out, they put me and other prisoners they had selected in the barrack, in the washroom of another barrack. And there I sat all night in the dark with water dripping from the ceiling. They were waiting until they had more of us so that they could bring the trucks and take us to the gas chamber. Well, I don't know how this happened, but one of the Polish boys in the blue and the white stripes, he helped us escape. You see, in the washroom there was a front door that was locked, but there was also a back door. He unlocked the back door and we ran out. Not all of us, but some of us. And then we headed back to the barracks. And that is when the problems began, because you see, they knew that they had taken out a certain number of girls. And all of a sudden, there was more. So they counted us, and they counted us continuously. I don't know how many times they counted. I don't know how I managed to escape that selection. This was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, where Mengele personally picked me out himself. He was a tall, good-looking man wearing a pressed uniform. He carried a stick in his boot. He rode on a motorcycle. And again, he picked me out for the gas chambers. Twice. Because I was so skinny. And again, I managed to escape the line to the crematorium. The Nazis were so clever. The Nazis were so clever. One day, the guards came and saw that some people had rashes between their fingers because of the dirt. So the guards said, "Line up, everybody. We are going to take you to a doctor." Of course, nobody believed them. But the SS came. They saw who had the rash and they picked out the people themselves. Sure enough, these people came back with bandages. The doctor had even given them an ointment. So the next time that the SS said, "Line up," a number of people from my hometown went, as well as a couple of my cousins. They never brought those people back. The Nazis were so clever. Or maybe they were not so smart. Maybe we were just dumb or naive. One day they told us that we should line up according to the ABCs. And I had a cousin named Rose with us, so I said, "Tell them that your name is Ayla, so that you can walk with us," because she always stayed with us in the barracks. So we began to walk, and she came with us. And they took a group of 1,000 women, maybe more, to the showers, where they showered us, and they gave us new dresses, and then they loaded us again onto cattle cars. Now, we did not know where we were going, but we were happy to leave Auschwitz-Birkenau. We did not care where we were going because the conditions at Auschwitz-Birkenau were so terrible, we would have gone anywhere. Soon, we learned we were being deported to Stutthof concentration camp. Stutthof concentration camp was built in September of 1939 in a wooded area west of Stutthof, about 22 miles east of Gdańsk, and the place was horrible. We arrived at got to Stuttgart, we did not know where we were going. People were afraid because Auschwitz was selective. I remember in Stuttgart, we saw a transport of women from Lithuania, from outside the wire fence, and we asked them with our hands, a sort of sign language, what is going on here? But we were not able to talk to them because we did not speak their language. They gassed those women there. They did not make selections like they did in Auschwitz. When we came to Stuttgart, nobody knew where we were going. My cousins were afraid. A majority of them did not want to go with us because they thought we were going to be killed. We did not know where we were going. We just wanted to leave Auschwitz. We stayed in Stuttgart for about 4 weeks, not long. I remember we had couples there and they were chosen from the prisons. They really used to do that. Can you believe they would take Polish men from the prison and they would make them couples? Now these men were known for their cruelty. This man, he was beating these women. One kick from him and the person never got up again. And he was the one who would walk us to work to clean the camp and to clean the toilets. And the toilet facilities, they were also better in Stuttgart than Auschwitz-Birkenau. But overall, Stuttgart seemed more like a transit camp than a labor camp. And eventually, again, we were being deported to Bromberg. Now, another group of about 1,000 women were selected to go to Bydgoszcz, and I was among this group. Bydgoszcz was a Polish city, and we worked at Bromberg Ost concentration camp. This was a women's sub-camp of Stuttgart. Now, Bromberg Ost was in Bydgoszcz, which is a Polish city, and our camp was just a little bit outside. When we arrived there, we did not know where we were going. People panicked because Stuttgart was selected as well, but the SS, they saw the panic and they drew a circle around them. And we were used as slave labor for the Deutsche Reichsbahn, loading cargo, digging protected ditches. They would call these work commandos. Now, work commandos were when a group of 100 girls would go here and do one job, and a group of about 50 girls would go here and do another job. And these were not always the same jobs. Some of them were digging protected ditches or building the trenches for the soldiers, all hard labor. Now, the sleeping facilities and the food was better at Bydgoszcz than it was in Stuttgart or Auschwitz, but the unfavorable weather conditions and the hard labor caused many illnesses. We worked outside with no warm clothes until December 8, 1944, when the camp commandant ordered several hundred winter coats. Now, I think about 1,000 women were in Bydgoszcz, where they did not make selection, or they did make selection, but not to kill people like they did in Auschwitz. In Bydgoszcz, if a woman could no longer work, she would be sent back to Stuttgart and killed there, but there was no killing Germans, they would pick out the women from among the deportees to be capos and block testers, but there was also German supervisors there. And there were a lot of women SS. In Stutthof, I saw no women SS, but here in Wittgosch, they were the ones who walked us to work with the dogs. And among the women were the Aufseherinnen. This was Eva Paradies, Hertha Botha, and Gerta Steinhoff, all who selected prisoners for the gas chamber. Among the Oberaufseherin was Johanna Wysotsky. Now, the couple on our block, she was chosen from one of our girls as well, but she was not bad. She would try to deal with us. She would beg us to obey her and say, "I do not want to hit you." And when the Lagerführer would come in and say that he needed girls to line up, our girls were not bad. But the Germans, they were bad. The Germans would hit us. And one time, I got hit. One day, we would come home. Ordinarily, we would come home from work, and we would be given our coffee and our bread, and we would be told we could go back and sleep until the next night when we had to work again. But this night, not the main German guy, but the one under him. I believe his name was Bo. He came in, and he told everybody to get out and line up because he needed a group of girls to go here and here. And so we just tried to count him. We had already come from work, and he said, "No, I need 50 girls to go here and 100 girls to go there." So we tried to tell him we had just come from work. And he pulled out his stick, and he gave me one hard blow. I had crooked teeth on the top of here, two right on top of the other. And that day, when I got hit, I lost both of those teeth on top. I never got them replaced. I never needed braces after that blow. But the Germans, they would beat us often when we were walking to work. If we stepped slightly out of line, the SS, they would come up, and she would grab her stick and she would beat us. And on that day that I lost my two teeth on the top, I worked the night, a day, and then when I came back, I had to go to my original job. So I worked the night, a day, and a night, but I survived. In Wittgosch, we would walk to work, but we had to be very careful because the women, the SS women, had dogs that were very well trained. Now these dogs, if you even stepped slightly out of line, these dogs would jump on you. Now I had a blister on my foot. We had quite a walk to work, and I was wearing wooden claws. My blister, it was infected. It opened and it closed. So I had a bit of a limp when I walked. But when the SS guard came up to me in the line, the pain went away and I walked straight. I was so afraid. Fear took over and my blister did not even hurt anymore. But as soon as she left, I was in pain again. I don't know if we were thinking clearly. I don't know what we were thinking. We were exhausted. We were malnourished. We were not thinking about freedom. We were thinking about the food that we can hold in our hands. Sometimes when we would walk to work, the Polish people, they would give us food, or they would drop food on the ground. They did not want to be caught by the SS. They were afraid of them as well. But our minds only worked on the search for food, on what we could hold in our hands to eat. And sometimes we did not go to work. On these days, we would go to a washroom. We each had one dress only that we would take off and wash, and we would wait for it to dry. We would tell SS told everybody to get out of the barracks and line up because we were leaving. But people started to panic. We did not know where we were going. Ordinarily, we would come home and we would be given our bread and we would be told we could go to sleep. People were running around aimlessly, stealing bread from the kitchens. It was chaos. But we lined up. All of us, except for the sick people. There was a sort of hospital at the camp. I do not know what happened to those sick people. And then we started to march. Later, these would be called the death marches. This was in maybe early March 1945, but there was still a deep snow on the ground. I always remember being cold. It took us an entire day to line up. And then we started walking to Germany. We didn't know why. We heard rumors that the Russian front was upon us. We walked for days or weeks even. At night, the SS day would chase us out onto farms and we would stay in barns. Now, there were potatoes in these barns and they were frozen, but they would feed the pigs though. And there were also sugar beets. We used to steal them and eat them and they were so sweet. I don't know why we didn't eat them at home. And then, the next morning, we would walk again. Everybody from the camp went with us, all of the guards. Now, most of them would walk, but some of them had their motorcycles. Now, I don't know where any of them went when they chased us onto the farms to go to sleep. And then the next day, again we walked. And this time, some people could not make it. These people, they would lay down on the side of the streets, or the SS would shoot them. And then, one day, the Russians started bombing the sky, so we fled into the fields to hide. I don't know what kept us marching. Maybe we thought that we were going somewhere better. Maybe we were not thinking at all, and we were so malnourished, so exhausted. And then at dusk, one day we stood up, and we did not see any guards or any dogs. So we looked at each other and asked, where did the guards go? And we looked into the street, and it was chaos. There were trucks, wagons, people, everybody was running away, and a lot of Germans lived in this area. Rich Germans, civilian Germans were fleeing this area. So we looked to the left and to the right, and we began to march. We were so worried. I don't know how long we marched without the guards, without the dogs, but it was nighttime and still we were marching. Now, ordinarily at nighttime, we would be chased onto the farms, into the barns. You know, I think about 1,000 women started this death march from Vineland, where there were no killings, nor were there gas chambers. Yes, about 1,000 women, more or less. Of course, we lost a few, but 1,000 women. Many of these people died on the death march, from sickness, or SS bullet, or savaged by the dogs. You know, as I think back now, I think I must have been stupid when I learned that the Nazis had left. Because I was disappointed. I didn't know where we were going to sleep that night. Every single day we would go to work and we would come back and we would be given our coffee and our bread and we would be told we could go back to the barracks to sleep until not have my caretakers. Then we learned that we could go wherever we wanted to go. There were many rich Germans in this area, and they lived on farms, and Polish people worked for them. I remember we used to try and get onto their farms, but they were worried that the SS would come back. They did not know what was going on either. So they chased us off. I remember one time we snuck onto a farm and they ran us off. And then, at some point, my cousin, my sister, and I, we made our way to a miller's shop where they made flour. Now, the miller, he lived there, not too far, in his shack, and he himself would not touch anything. He thought that the Nazis would come back, but he let us stay in his barn. Now, we stayed in his barn in the dark for days. Rats crawled on us as we slept. We stayed there for days until the Soviets came. And then the old man yelled up to us, "Hitler is dead!" And for 3 or 4 days afterwards, we heard a lot of shooting. We were afraid to go outside because we saw bullets whizzing through and breaking the windows. But we looked out, and we saw the first Russian officer in white clothes or white uniforms, and then the rest of them came. And we saw then what they did, how they entered every barn, killed every animal, and loaded them onto trucks. But we found another Russian official with a big ring. We told him we are Jewish, and he gave us food. But not all of the Russians were helpful. Some of them were wild and drunk, shooting and raping, and we stayed away from them. We didn't follow the front when we decided to go home. We were very far from the front. The front kept pushing further into Germany, and the Wehrmacht kept retreating. But we saw them, how they broke into all the German homes and took everything. Then we decided maybe we should go back home. We were just street people at this point. We moved from place to place, but the war wasn't over yet. You see, in Budapest, Hungary, for example, Germany was still in power. So we wandered. We decided to go back to Vineland because it was a bigger city, and we knew that we could not be too far because we had walked. If you walked for a month, how far could you go? We made our way to Warsaw. We were there sleeping in the train stations and begging for food from the bazaar. The city was rubble. It was destroyed. And then we decided to go back to Munich. Maybe our father or our brother had survived. We knew that my 2 younger brothers were not alive. We found out in Auschwitz-Birkenau that my mother was killed. But we went back to Munich just to find somebody. I was 18 years old at this time, and I was so confused. I accounted for my survival, for my cousin and my sister, and luck, because so many people did not make it. It was helpful to have my cousin and my sister there. We did everything together. We gave up on God at first because probably God gave up on us, but then we had our families. We had our homes. I tried to talk to my children, but it was hard. I couldn't talk to my children about my experiences for a very should never happen again. This horrible thing.
So at this point, there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask some questions if you would like. What I'm going to do is come around and pass the microphone around, and you can feel free to ask some questions if you would like. Do me a favor, just when you have a question, please raise your hand. Can I ask some questions of Mrs. Roth? She'll do her best to answer your questions, but also of the actors as well. Start with the young lady in the back.
My biggest challenge doing this piece out of everything was memorizing the lines.
Yes.
I have to say. It is a difficult history to tell, and it is one that makes like the storyteller and the listener, it's very depressing. But the hardest part of this was not the emotional toll, but learning the lines.
Yeah.
The emotional toll was pretty big too.
You have another one? You don't want it? Oh, Mrs. Roth? Mrs. Roth or the actress?
Mrs. Ross? Hello.
I'm going to pass the mic to her back as soon as you're finished. That's okay. You can ask your question. Forgot? That's all right.
You don't want it. No,
All right, guys, relax, relax.
Hello. You did it, by the way. But how was your how did it feel for you doing the accent? Was it a struggle doing the accent?
The accent?
Yeah.
Strangely enough, I just did the accent one day and it worked, and it just came out like that. So I've been doing it. I didn't work overly hard on it. I would just do it and it would come out really well. But I did learn how to do a Russian accent a couple years ago, which I think helped a lot. And if I have to give any advice for learning accents, I say learn the phonetic alphabet and something called IPA. It tells you every single shape that your mouth can make and every single vowel, and it helps you transition from vowel shapes that one country's dialect would use to another one. So look up IPA if you wanna learn accents.
Oh yeah. So is it hard for you to do this by yourself, without other people acting with you?
Yeah, doing a one-woman show is something that I haven't done before this year. I go to Rowan University. I'm pretty good at it. It's not that far from here. But I did my first one-woman show, which is this, at Rowan University this year. And I was terrified. I was so scared. I'm a theater major, and still I was like, I don't know if I can do this. But once you start kind of telling the story, you create the characters there with you. It becomes so much easier to not be by yourself. So I think for the majority of this play, I'm not really by myself up here. I'm talking to so many people. And it helps having you guys in the audience to talk to.
Were you emotional while you were
history, but I love to talk about it because it needs to be talked about. So I don't feel sad discussing it. Of course, I feel sad that it happened.
I would like to ask, do you have any tips for any like future actors that want to become something older and progressing, like how you perform beautifully, you cut like your
Thank you. I do. Okay, so I will tell you guys something. If I don't know how many of you guys are into theater and take theater classes, but you don't get over feeling like you're not good enough once you go to college and major in it. You feel like that for the rest of your life. All of my friends feel like that at college. And I think out of all of the acting, like I could give you like tips on acting technique and stuff, but the most important thing I learned was that you just have to believe that you can do it. No matter what the role is, you just have to believe you're capable of it. Because once you believe that, you're just gonna convince everyone else. And the other one thing I want to say, that this is actually like technical acting advice, there is nothing more important than speaking to somebody else in your scenes. So if you're doing like a monologue and you don't have someone else, that's why it's so important to imagine someone else if they're talking to you, because you will never deliver a line better than if you're delivering it to someone. So it's crucial to like make up that character or that other person for yourself, like a monologue or like this show, or if you're doing scenes, just it seems obvious you would be talking to the other person, but it's really like you have to put a lot of focus onto it. That's my acting advice. I can talk to you more about it later too if you like.
Me too. Oh, I'm not having a question. Talk to me about it also.
Of course, I would love to.
I have a question for Ms. Roth.
Speak louder. This is Rob. R-O-T-H.
I have a question for Ms. Roth. I'm not really sure how to ask it, and you don't have to answer, of course. But I know my mind tends to run off a lot in very like intense moments. And what was going through your mind when like, all of this was happening? Like,
This one's addressed to you, if you want to answer it. I have my own idea of telling the story as well, I can share. Okay, so doing this play, Elizabeth's not a character per se, because she's a real human being right here in front of us. So, and this story is a testimony that she actually told. So it wasn't like copying and pasting like a story or like a press release. Like it was actually just coming like from her mind to from her mouth. So a lot of the really intense parts, you can see that it gets very intense, and then all of a sudden we have to switch subjects. That's a common theme for a lot of Holocaust survivors. I've learned in a couple of courses that I took, is that you can talk about the intensities of what went on, but the details, sometimes those are the parts that you have to leave out because they're so scary. I also think that another thing both Elizabeth and I do is use humor as a coping mechanism. Because there were 3 other of the Holocaust shows that went up at Rowan a couple weeks ago, and this is the only one that had a joke in it, so. But yeah, coping mechanisms, laughing fixes a lot of things.
My question is for Mrs. Roth, and I just wanted to know how it was to relocate after the Holocaust and like how you found a new home.
So,
Now, keep in mind, this was very difficult, and you should all, with 1,000 applause for Mrs. Roth. Realize that, like other survivors, they had to recreate and reinvent their lives. tried to figure out where they were going, what they're going to do with their lives. Mrs. Roth, as you heard, was 18 years old in 1944. Think about your age. Think about how old you are right now. The experience that she had as a teenager, and to survive that, and what was left of her family. So what she did is what other people did too, in this very precious community that you live in, Vineland, which is people found a way to go somewhere. Many left Europe. Some came to Israel. Some came to the United States. Tried to start a new life here. And Mrs. Roth was one of them. She came ultimately to live in Vineland, New Jersey, Millville, New Jersey. In 52, came to this country. And she came 52 to Vineland. She's correcting me as she should. I was waiting for that. But she came, 2 of her sons, by the way, are here. Edward and Hank. The bottom line here is they made a life. By the way, a successful life. With children and grandchildren. And they went into business and achieved what some might call the American dream. And they were resilient. They found a way to go beyond the trauma that was part of the common experience of survivors, which is why this community had a lot of survivors that came here in the 1950s that were part of this community and what made this a very special place to live. So her experience is one of the ability to come from the ashes and to find your way. And in your own little way, that's something to remember. And that's why this experience, this piece of teaching, is worth it. Perhaps, now to add to this, is that theater and the creative arts is one way perhaps to encourage young people to continue to study about the subject matter.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing about, I was going to say not to speak for Elizabeth too much, but I did just do a play as you. So maybe that's okay. Is one thing about moving to America for a lot of survivors after the Holocaust is something that we wouldn't expect. A lot of Americans did not want to hear what happened. A lot of people in Europe, although they knew something was going on to the Jewish people, the actual concentration camps, like for a long time that was trying to be kept hidden under secret, but when it did come out, it was so horrific to talk about, so brutal that a lot of people didn't want to hear. And when Elizabeth moved to America, she wanted to tell her story, and she tried to, but the people who live here, just like me and you, did not want to listen. And it would become too much for them to hear. They'd become annoyed. And that's why it's really important that all of you guys are here and that I'm here is because we need to listen. The people in Elizabeth's past did not listen very well when she came here, but we have to be here for that. We have to listen. And no matter what religion, ethnicity, anything you are, everybody needs to talk about the Holocaust. Not just Jewish people, everybody does. Because there are a lot of genocides that still happen to this day. There is a lot of anti-Semitism still. And there are a lot of people that don't believe the Holocaust happened. So you, me, everybody here, we are all witnesses to it. We know that this happened. We have Elizabeth here. This is a history that is up to all of us to share now. I'm passing on my responsibility to you guys too.
So this question is for either one of you. What was the most difficult aspect when it came to making the play? Like when the idea first came to be?
Okay. survivor. To me, when I first got cast as this, I felt completely honored to tell Elizabeth's story, but I did feel like maybe it wasn't my place to. Something that was really difficult for me to learn was that it is my place to tell this story. It is your place to tell the story. It is not up to Jewish people to tell the story. It is up to all of us. But that is something that I felt a little bit like a fraud, because not only am I not Jewish, I have never had a traumatic experience that even equates a little bit to what Elizabeth has gone through. It's a lot of you need to get over yourself in order to perform a show like this. Because of course I have had my own experiences in my life that weren't the greatest, but absolutely none of them have been to the level of the Holocaust and these Holocaust survivors. So just being able to get rid of the feeling of kind of fraud you have, get over that, and say, this is my responsibility to share this history and to tell this story, that was way harder for me than I expected it to. I was also afraid of what Elizabeth would think of me. I was really nervous. I wanted her to like who she saw on the stage, and it's not like I can actually be another person, so it was a little difficult. Acting tip for you guys, you cannot play another person. Act as yourself under the circumstances you're given as realistically as possible. You can't be a character. So I was nervous to see Elizabeth watch me be her.
Good question so far. Who has more?
Another question?
Okay.
I just want to say one thing. I've never been formally introduced, but this is Natalie Malanafi. When will you be graduating?
I graduated Monday!
What are your intentions now that you graduated? Will you be in performing arts?
I will never do homework again, but so I did graduate as a theater major. I don't know what year you guys are, but if you're thinking about going to college and stuff, becoming a theater major is something that you definitely have to plan out how to tell your family. Because it's a little bit like, what are you going to do with that? But I have a lot of plans for what I'm going to do with it. First of all, I'm going to travel to high school to be telling Elizabeth's story, because I think that a tour of the Manya Project is what this show is part of, would be wonderful to teach. I didn't even realize I like historical theater so much, but this is my plan. So I live in Virginia when I don't go to Rowan. I'm moving back home, and I'm going to be in the Richmond, D.C. theater area. I would like to become a director and own my own theater company as well as act, so that is plans in progress. I have a title for the company I want to start, but no other plans. And eventually I'm going to be joining a traveling theater company. These are all plans I have to figure out once I go back home, like the actual timeline of them. But once I get to open my own theater company, I want to make a traveling theater company nationally and internationally. So I've got a lot of plans with my theater degree. Thank
Oh,
you.
now there's a question. There's a question.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I need to meet you guys.
Is Dr. Hospital still?
He was not able to make it today.
Any other questions? Okay. I want to thank everybody. I hope you found this to be worthwhile. I hope you found this to be a good experience, not only from a theatrical and artistic point of view, but also in terms of the experience of learning a little bit of what one survivor's experience, and this will hopefully spur you on to continue to be interested in this subject. So we thank you all for your attention today, and hope use this experience to positive purpose. Thank you very much. Thank you.